Hi, this is Paul. Yesterday I had one of those occurrences where I made a video and I really didn't like it. Usually I post it and sometimes I delete it. This time I kept it overnight and then I posted the conversation with Nathan Filbert, which I thought was absolutely outstanding, even though not enough people will watch it. And then I decided I'm just going to throw it in the membership section and it's going to stay there. Um, because this is a really sensitive issue on lots of different levels, and I wasn't really happy with how I treated it, but I still wanted a record of what I said. So I just threw it in the Randos membership section. And so if you're really curious and you want to watch it, you can go there and you can watch it. But I'm going to cover some of the same things in this video. Maybe. You never know how a video is going to go when it starts. This started with this blog piece at the Reformed Journal. The Reformed Journal is a publication that has its roots in the Christian Reformed Church in the post-war period in the Christian Reformed Church, when the Christian Reformed Church and some RCA pastors to Reformed Church in America sort of had its heyday in the 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, when I don't know if they're boomers. I think they're just pre-boomers, a lot of them. Nick Waltersdorf, the Calvin Philosophy Department, a lot of those intellectuals. The Reformed Journal was a very storied institution in the Christian Reformed Church, and I think it has been diminished greatly. I'll say that. The article that caught my attention was "The kids are all right, more or less." Now, part of the point that I've been making, trying to explain to many of my colleagues who are now retired and older than I am, many people who are extremely upset at what has been happening in the Christian Reformed Church for the last 10 years, I'm trying to explain to them why younger generations are not just getting with the program. Now, when I say that, I don't mean all younger generations aren't getting with the program, because in the Christian Reformed Church there are many children of my generation and before who are very much with the program and like the program. The only thing is they are not in church. And what that meant for the current battle in the Christian Reformed Church was that when Synod counted votes over same-sex marriage, the people who had been leading the Christian Reformed Church for the last few generations discovered they were completely out of line with the main body of the church. And they weren't just a little out of line. Back in the 90s, when the Christian Reformed Church had the warfare over women in church office, the votes were like in the low 50s, high 40s. It just went back and forth a number of times. But these votes were like 70-30, 70-30, 70-30. And I've spent the last number of years trying to explain to a number of these people why the Christian Reformed Church changed, why its leadership didn't change, and there are many videos that I have with respect to that. I don't know what's grabbing my camera over there. But one of the key elements of that is that the children of the Christian Reformed and RCA elites no longer go to church. The great unchurching happened to their kids. And for the most part, they're cool with it. Now, this has been something that people haven't spoken about a lot, because there's enough in the Christian Reformed Church, enough feeling of shame that people don't want to admit their kids aren't going to church. But what this piece in the RJ basically signaled was, I think, what Grim Grizz calls normalization. You know what? Our kids aren't going to church, and that's okay. And that means a lot. Now, this is a significant departure, especially in the Christian Reformed Church. When the Dutch immigrants came to North America after the Afscheiding, and you can see the spelling right there on the screen, you can look it up on the internet. The Afscheiding was a split between the state church and a conservative secession movement in the Netherlands over a variety of issues. Many of those issues would get repeated in the afscheiding happened in 1839. Many of those issues would be repeated in the 1850s and 60s in the schism between the Christian Reformed Church and the Reformed Church in America. Many of those issues had to do with the Dutch language, allowing people in secret societies like Masons into the church. A lot of those issues were basically cultural. Now, this week, I released my conversation with Jella Heisman, who was talking about the Netherlands Reformed. Now, a lot of that is not in the abridged version of the conversation. It's in the unabridged version of the conversation, because for the first 27 minutes, the sound was terrible, and I didn't know how much people would be able to hear from the conversation. So I made two versions, because a lot of people, when they hear the sound is bad, they just click away. So I made both versions of the conversation. And the early one, he talks about what was still sort of the regime in the Netherlands Reformed Church. And this was still in my childhood in certain segments of Dutch Calvinism, even in New Jersey, as I mentioned in my conversation, that the women next door to us were part of that church. Now, you can find a telling of that church and some of the transition from this aspect of Dutch Calvinism. Now, if you listen to my conversation with Heisman, he notes that part of why he left that tradition was he discovered it wasn't very in line with Calvin and Luther. But it was all about, you did not want to join the church and definitely not want to take communion if you didn't have experiential evidence of your election. Otherwise, taking communion, you would be heaping judgment upon yourself in accordance with the text in 1 Corinthians. And so in this book, In God's Crucible by Vendelen, which was published in 1950, but it preserves a lot of history back all the way to the afscheiding, you get a sense of the generations before in the Christian Reformed Church, and to a degree in the RCA as well. He talked about his youngest child, the youngest child of his grandparents, Vendelen's father, who was born 8 years after the secession or the afscheiding in the state church. And the seceders at that time were very much despised and persecuted. It took courage to join them. So they were a church of rigor. They were a steep slope church. Besides, my grandparents were living in a section of the country where many had a wrong conception of the covenant of grace and subsequently of the meaning of holy baptism and Lord's Supper. Now, this was obviously Vendelen's take on what his parents and grandparents had believed. And they were believed in line with the idea that you needed to have a credible experiential moment or element that you could point to say, I am elect. Now I know. Now I am free to partake in the Lord's Supper. And what you'd have is you'd have churches with many, many, many people go through their whole lives and never actually join the church, but faithfully attend every Sunday, listen to sermons, pray fervently, hold family devotions, raise their kids sacrificially. Even if they believed they were potentially reprobate, they walked the walk. And this was a standard of rigor. This was a standard of devotion that made a deep impression on their children and grandchildren. And at one time, it sort of discredited this posture by this particular group of Dutch Calvinist churches, but imprinted in them the rigor and discipline and conviction of holding to the church and building community. My grandfather, Vendelen, for one, had not made confession of faith and never took this step, although he was 87 years old and undoubtedly was a God-fearing man. He came to Burham after he had retired from the farm. I can still see him sitting in his big wicker chair reading books like Petrus Immensus, the God-fearing communicant. He's still waiting for that sign from the Holy Spirit that he's elect so he can have the green light to take communion, but he's running out of life and he's not getting it. to find out whether he had the marks of a truly converted man. He did not detect those marks very clearly. Hence, he did not dare to make confession make confession of a faith he feared he did not have. He felt that he must be fully assured that he had certain experiences before approaching the table of the Lord. He was afraid that he might eat and drink damnation unto himself. Of course, grandfather was wrong. Of course, this is Van Dellen. After many, now I received a communication from someone in the corner who's Dutch Calvinist, and he says, this hadn't totally passed away. Now, the person that wrote me, their immigration is in Canada. And so again, and there's still remnants in the United States like this, but there are remnants in Canada like this. And as I said, when I was growing up, the neighbor ladies next door were part of this church. A former elder of our congregation in Denver would say he had the anchor within the ship instead of outside in the solid ground of God's promises, which are yea and amen in Christ Jesus. In other words, what happened in the Christian Reformed Church is people said, no, we should not look for some experiential evidence. We should believe in the Word of God. We should believe in the covenant promises made to us at baptism. No, the baptismal regeneration would be another big fight. The Dutch would really wrestle over this, and the church would often fractionate over these issues. But eventually in the Christian Reformed Church, basically covenant, faithfulness, and assurance of pardon, seeing fruit of the Holy Spirit, and much more conventional evidences in one's life and in one's behavior and given from other people were sufficient. And then the Bible was used to say, I have assurance of my salvation. You just read it in the Heidelberg Catechism. Christ, the Heidelberg Catechism is full of those kinds of assurances. He had his eye more on himself than on Christ. And this is a critique of his grandfather and of his grandfather's theological position, even though he believed his grandfather was a godly man and saved in the way that that word is used in that context. His grandmother, too. My grandmother probably made the same mistake. She was fully assured that she was a child of God, but she also lived too much by experience. And since her husband could not testify that he had the same experiences, this was, to say the least, a doubtful case. So in other words, his grandmother was more willing to say, well, I've experienced these things. And so she went and participated in church, but her husband didn't. And these stories are not unusual. But what you see is that there's a focus on the church. Now, part of what happened in the Christian Reformed Church was when they immigrated, they had a great degree of anxiety about the immigration. And so they very much did not want to become Americans as such. It was the First World War that really sort of swung them because, at least in one case, Americans burned down a Christian Reformed church because Dutch and Deutsch sound way too much alike. And so if you look at pictures from the First World War in America, this is where Christian Reformed churches are festooning their buildings with flags. Christian Reformed churches are now switching their services to English because they have to demonstrate patriotism. Now, that this is happening in a war is not incidental, and it's not incidental to this video. But in my grandparents' generation, so my grandparents would be younger than Van Dellen. In my grandparents' generation, holding to the Christian Reformed Church was deeply important. Even though my great-great-grandfather, they worshipped in a Reformed Church of America church, First RCA in Spring Lake, Michigan, because I've recently found a bunch of their obituaries. And it was very interesting. But I expect that when my great-grandfather moved to Grand Rapids after his wife passed away, giving birth to their sixth child, and so he moved to the city with his family, they joined Oakdale Park Christian Reformed Church. And that was the church that both my grandfather and my grandmother grew up in because it was right by their house, by Hall and Kalamazoo. And if I'm in Grand Rapids and I'm at Hall and Kalamazoo, I can point to the house that my grandfather grew up in. It was right there. And my grandmother, I don't know which house was hers. I think it's a little further down Hall. That's where my grandmother grew up. They grew up just houses from each other and married. But this conviction for the church and for the Christian Reformed Church, RCA, iffy, it depends. But anything outside of that, it was a very big deal. And this was true in the Christian Reformed Church, and still is, I'm sure, in some places. But it was true of the Christian Reformed Church well into the 70s and 80s, that you only marry in the Christian Reformed Church. So that kind of discipline was very much there. And the consequences for that could very well be the eternal jeopardy of your soul. That background makes this piece so very interesting. My adult children have never sharply or categorically rejected Christianity. It's more a case of slip sliding away. I think they still have faith. This gets into this sort of nominalism that you can find, I think, throughout the world, but also in America. Part of the reason I keep the old videos is because I did all the work of putting the links in so I can find them easy. Ryan Burge just recently wrote a thing on the Nuns Project, Nuns in Name Only, because while for the last few years we've had all of this hype about all of these people leaving Christianity or leaving the church or leaving participation or no longer identifying as Christian, continued research has shown that many of these nuns actually continue to go to church. Many of these nuns continue to pray. Many of these nuns, basically, in terms of some of their behaviors, are indistinguishable from people who identify as Christians. They just sort of changed their self-identification. In fact, he said most of them are just sort of like Protestants, just a little less active than someone who identifies as an active Protestant. So while it's been huge news that there's all these nuns, many of these nuns, N-O-S-E-S, are actually continuing to do all of the things that Christians do. And so when he writes, I think they still have faith. They still believe in God, whatever that means or is worth. It's a church that they're less sure about. Now, this then tends to go into a lot of the de-churching things that, well, church is disappointed, someone said something mean, but I think the vast majority of people who don't go to church basically don't go to church because it just doesn't really rank high enough on their priorities. They don't seem to find enough value in the practice that would encourage them to choose church instead of sleeping in or going to a ball game or enjoying their weekend in some other way. It's basically a rank issue. They don't necessarily have a grievance against the church. It's just that, why would I go? It'd be sort of like, so the Oakland A's are now playing in Sacramento until their new stadium in Las Vegas is built. And I haven't been to a single A's game. Would I like to go to an A's game? I went to a Cubs game in Chicago. I had a lot of fun. I thought I should go to an A's game while they're in Sacramento. That's going to cost me some money. It's going to take an evening out. If I go, that'd be fine. But if I don't go, that'd be fine. I'm not necessarily an A's fan. Am I a baseball fan? Not really much anymore. Do I have anything against baseball? No, not really. Did I enjoy watching the game when I saw it? Yeah, it was fine. But I'm probably not going to go, and I'm not going to buy an A's jersey, and I'm not going to get an A's hat. And so, and church is sort of like that. And then the question is, well, how do you feel about that? And so he writes about that. And, he talks about his kids being PKs. There's whole issues around that, but most of them aren't PKs. My children are a bit of church connoisseurs, even snobs. They dabble or visited churches. They can tell within 10 feet of the front door if it's a church for them. And of course, 10 feet, well, is there a rainbow flag or isn't there a rainbow flag? There's a big one for a lot of unchurched people. What's it going to be? Is it The sniffer is especially attuned to anything smacking of white American evangelicalism. Oh, okay. So now we sort of have a divide. There's a big cultural divide. There's the church of right and the church of left that are seemingly the two strongest churches in America today, the church of right and the church of left. And so, well, if they were going to go to a church, they definitely wouldn't want to go to a church of right. They'd want to go to a church of left. Certainly they caught some of the aversion from his wife and himself. I think it's also a generational thing. Christianity isn't an especially attractive brand to most millennials. Depends on the millennial. And this is where we get going, because increasingly church is somewhere, well, we'll see if, part of the reason I've got a degree of skepticism whenever there's sort of a new wave of potentially cheap interest in church that, yeah, I was all excited by 9/11. I was all excited about such and such a war. I got into a car accident, and oh my goodness, my heart stopped, and I realized I could die. I was in church the next week, but a month or two after that, they're not in church anymore. Had a fight with my wife, and so, or one of our kids got in trouble, so we're going to church, and they go to church for 3 or 4 weeks, and then they don't go anymore. This is extremely common among, let's say, the Christ haunted or the church haunted like this. But if there's no emergency, if there's no problem, because the truth is that once they start going to church, after sort of the motivation, if I go to church, will I hear about Charlie Kirk or will I not hear about Charlie Kirk? Or will I hear about George Floyd or not about George Floyd? Are they going to be talking about institutional racism, or are they going to be talking about, or am I going to get all the whiffs of MAGA language? Which one is it going to be? And that's where I'll make my decision. Which again sort of gives churches that, well, they're not going to talk about anything because they're just going to stick to the liturgy. Well, at least, nothing said. Nobody expects the Orthodox. Nobody expects to have Charlie Cook sort of snuck into Chrysostom's divine liturgy. So, what are you going to say? In my years in the pastorate, I noticed that the adult children of pastors were frequently, but not always, brittle. A good place to raise children. Some people send their kids there because they want their kids to get some of that. And he sort of. I'd be overjoyed if my children and grandchildren became part of a church. I'm sad and disappointed, hurt that they're not. There's a sense of failure about something I considered seriously significant. There's so much that is wonderful that I can affirm and extremely proud of in them. I suppose I focus on that. Do we talk about these things? Occasionally, rarely. They know how I feel. Being pushy is definitely not the way forward. I could theologize about the visible and invisible church, though I'm not fully on board with those ideas. I could wrestle with Cyprian's, you cannot have God as your father unless you have the church as your mother, not to mention the Belgic confessions apart from it, the church, there is no salvation, Article 28. But so many of life's conundrums, persistent prayer seems like the best option. So he ends it not on a terribly definitive note. But then I read the comments, and Dwayne Kelderman was a career minister in the Christian Reformed Church, high status, had good pulpits, was known as a good preacher, became vice president of Calvin Seminary. If you search for him on YouTube, you can probably find him in connection with Neeland Avenue, where he gave a rather, a lot of people know about the address that he gave, basically justification of why Neeland Avenue went the way they did with respect to same-sex marriage, et cetera, et cetera. So he's not a rando in the Christian Reformed Church at all. And again, in the Christian Reformed Church, you know this because you know people, because it's not that big, but it's not that small, and so reputations carry. And he writes this: thank you for your honest, vulnerable post. And again, it's vulnerable because you have that sense of a little bit of shame that pastors have. Even my kids don't line up with what I believe. And that hurts. Your kids and your kids' relationship to the church are virtually parallel. Your kids and our kids, he and his wife. We're not worried about our kids' eternal welfare. And I thought, that's interesting. It didn't get mentioned in the article itself. But that this is a Christian Reformed minister, and that in the church that Dwayne Kelderman grew up in, and likely the church that Dwayne Kelderman was ordained in, non-participation in church would in the Christian Reformed Church for many, many years, and probably still in some places, not showing up for church every week. He might miss a week. You got an excuse, or we're sick, 2 weeks, the elders are really starting to go. 3 weeks, the elders are going to be at your door. I was told a story by an uncle of mine of a girl that he knew in the neighborhood growing up in a CRC neighborhood in Grand Rapids, and she was pregnant out of wedlock. And so her mother was keeping an eye out, and sure enough, the elders come because she hadn't been showing up in church. So the elders are going to knock and find out, why aren't you showing up in church? Her mother answers the elders at the door, "We've joined the RCA." And that was that. So that's how you would get out, because the Christian Reformed Church was very scrupulous. If you didn't show up for church every week, visits would happen, questions would be asked. It's no longer the case in many Christian Reformed churches. That might become the case again, because part of what we're seeing again is we're moving from this sense of liberation and we're entering into this sense of rigor. Seraphim Richard Rowland has been posting pictures of him and his wife because they're celebrating an anniversary. They're lovely to see, from Texas. And I thought of sort of grew up conservative evangelical. You can find his Randos on the channel if you search for it. I thought about him and Jen Hatmaker, and they're just sort of, And of course, he goes Orthodox. Interesting. Josiah Trenum was on Tucker Carlson's thing about that. He there then was super, super interesting. Maybe I'll make a video about it, but that's not the focus of this video. But Dwayne Kelderman saying that, one of the things, again, Sam Tiedemann said to me was, I'm sure there's an underlying sense of universalism in the Christian Reformed Church. It's not spoken. The Christian Reformed Church has gotten very unapocalyptic. And what you begin to notice is that there's always a bar. He might be worried about his children if, let's say, there was a divorce and the young kids were acting up. He might be worried about his kids and his grandkids if they started wearing MAGA hats. He might be worried about them if they started to go to one of those churches that is a church of left, or a church of right instead of a church of left. RCA's, this guy's probably fairly moderate, affirming. That tends to be the vibe of a lot of the writers for the RJ. He's written a lot in the RJ over the years. But again, if he went on Facebook, because that's the platform he would go on, if he went on Facebook and saw a daughter-in-law or a grandchild posting all kinds of things about affirming things about Charlie Cook, would that be okay? Wouldn't be enough to sever ties, but would that be okay? Are they going to be okay? And again, even in Kelderman's note, my sadness is for our kids, is for what our kids miss, not being connected to a church. Worship, particularly singing, means more to me at this point in my life than ever. And, these are all really fair points. Our kids don't experience the awe and exhilaration. But again, they're not getting the feels that I enjoy. And so they might miss it at some point. So I'm a little concerned about them. But I'm not concerned about the salvation of their soul. And basically the idea that you get is that America has these two churches, the church of left and the church of right. And they basically align with the political parties. And as recent surveys have noted, people are now more upset if one of your sons or daughters begins a romantic relationship with someone of the other political party than they would be of a different ethnic group or a different religion, or maybe even the same sex. In other words, to be part of the wrong church of right or church of left, that's a more grievous sin. Now, does that put your soul in jeopardy? Well, maybe for some people, but not for other people. But all of this talk about the future gets sort of transmitted into another world. And part of what I really appreciated about the portion of the Jordan Peterson, Alex O'Connor conversation, where they began to really wrestle with breaking out of the iron box of secularism, was what I really noticed is that we just don't have a lot of language outside of church, and that doesn't here to be sort of pluralistically kneecapped to talk in these terms. You know, basically, if you talk about hell at this point, even if you talk about universalism, some of you, you're a fundamentalist. Sorry, you're a fundamentalist if you actually believe in consequences after life, whether that's full-blown infernalism, as some people in the corner like to talk about it, or if it's universalism with a heavy dose of purgatory, so that in the end you bend the knee willingly instead of, I don't know, prickly plains where the bus from hell, a la C.S. Lewis' Great Divorce Lands. And that's the thing about, so much universalism. It part of the reason universalism is so tempting now is because you just don't have to say hard things with it. That doesn't have to be tied to you. And, it's just a lot nicer if the lovely people who are here on this likely stock photo, who are having a lovely family vacation, complete with grandchildren, but, if they're going to be cozying up with Adolf and Joseph Stalin, you don't even have to say Hitler's last name, or Chairman Mao in the afterlife, along with all the other people that were killed, well, how's that going to go? I mean, universalism has difficulties, too. We'll see if we get into that at Southeastuary, because Jordan Daniel Wood's going to be there. I don't know if he's going to talk about that, but he's been talking about that with J.D. Lionheart, and but that's one of these common conversations in the corner in terms of how things are going to go. But the whole just sort of dropping of eternal perdition and, let's say, the apocalypse. I posted this on my old blog in 2009 when I read the book. One could object that it is not worthy of God to wield the sword. Is God not love, long-suffering, and all-powerful love? A counter-question could go something like this. This is from Miroslav Volf's Exclusion and Embrace. Is it not a bit too arrogant to presume that our contemporary sensibilities about what is compatible with God's love are so much healthier than those of the people of God throughout the whole history of Judaism and Christianity? Recalling my arguments about self-immunization of the evildoers, one could further argue that in a world of violence, it would not be worthy of God not to wield the sword. If God were not angry at injustice and deception and did not have to make the final end to violence, God would not be worthy of our worship. Here, however, I am less interested in arguing that God's violence is not unworthy of God than in showing that it is beneficial to us. Atlin has rightly drawn our attention to the fact that in a world of violence, we are faced with an inescapable alternative, either God's violence or human violence. Most people who insist on God's nonviolence cannot resist using violence themselves, or tacitly sanctioning its use by others. They deem the talk of God's judgment irreverent, but think nothing of entrusting judgment into human hands, persuaded presumably that it is less dangerous and more humane than to believe in a God who judges. That we should bring down the powerful from their thrones seems responsible. That God should do the same, as the song of that revolutionary virgin explicitly states, seems crude. And so violence thrives secretly nourished by a belief in a God who refuses to wield the sword. My thesis that the practice of nonviolence requires a belief in divine vengeance will be unpopular with many Christians, especially theologians in the West. To the person who is inclined to dismiss it, I suggest imagining that you are delivering a lecture in a war zone, which is where a paper that underlies this chapter was originally delivered. Among your listeners are peoples whose cities and villages have been first plundered, then burned and leveled to the ground, whose daughters and sisters have been raped, whose fathers and brothers have had their throats slit. The topic of this lecture, a Christian attitude towards violence. The thesis, we should not retaliate since God is perfect, non-coercive love. Soon you would discover that it takes the quiet of a suburban home for the birth of the thesis that human nonviolence corresponds to God's refusal to judge. In a scorched land, soaked in blood of the innocent, it will invariably die. And as one watches it die, one will do well to reflect about the many pleasant captivities of the liberal mind. This brought me to Jordan Hall's tweet that was on our Friday estuary, July 11, where young Gray Hamilton appeared for the first time, and we all got to know him a little bit. He's been to Midwestuary. I don't know if he's going to be at Southeastuary or not, but he pitched Jordan's tweet, and it won the pitch. You know, Glenn Lowry. That's right, Glenn Lowry. Why? On one hand, you say these people are the problem, and yet you keep begging them to fix it. And if for the last 50 years they've demonstrated to you that they're not your friend, why do you imagine they're going to suddenly turn it now? And so what's the deal with that move? So Jordan responds to that by saying this long tweet. I'll take a swing. Dead center of Gen X here. So take it for what you will. Don't look to boomers for vision or even support. That's kind of, again, a Glenn Lowry point. Gen X has known that since at least the early 80s, probably earlier. If some flip and turn out to be helpful, that's pure upside. Here's the frame. Y'all are at war. It's a very different kind of war than the kids storming Normandy at beaches at Normandy faced, but that is the right mindset. You need to be on a wartime footing, else nothing will make sense. Now, the best way of thinking about your war is that it's a spiritual war, of which fifth generation war is a big part. The enemy isn't going to kill your kids. He's going to get you to do that, or to get them themselves to kill themselves, or cause you to never have any kids, or cause them to choose merely survival over life. Get the sense of it? That pretty much brings in a lot of the different pitches that we've had. Okay, and another option is, it was so interesting. It was this Gen Z woman on, I don't remember her name right now, on Ezra Klein brought up the screw tape letters. Because one of the things that's so clear in the screw tape letters is one of the easiest ways to sort of mark a person's path to hell is give them a good life and let them be completely satisfied with everything here. This is from C.S. Lewis's The Problem of Pain. The Christian doctrine of suffering explains, I believe, a very curious fact about the world we live in. The settled happiness and security which we all desire, God withholds from us by the very nature of the world. But joy, pleasure, and merriment, he scatters broadcast. We are never safe, but we have plenty of fun and some ecstasy. It is not hard to see why. The security we crave would teach us to rest our hearts in this world and oppose an obstacle to the return to God. Few moments of happy life, a landscape, a symphony, a merry meeting with our friends, a bath, or a football match have no such tendency. Our Father refreshes us on the journey with some pleasant inns, but will not encourage us to mistake them. And of course, part of the difficulty that you have as a parent is, you know, as a pastor, that it's almost always difficult and tragedy that drives people back into church. And you don't want that for your kids. You want their marriages to be great. You want their children to be healthy. You want everything. You want their jobs to be secure. You want them to have good health care. You want them to have be putting money away for retirement. You want good things for your kids in terms of this world. But there's hazard in all of that goodness. And part of what struck me about this piece was, well, the eschaton has arrived, I suppose. as long as my kids are, they're not getting divorced, nobody has a serious drinking or secret drug problem, nobody's got a 10-year affair under that's going to blow up the marriage, nobody's got, AA, you're as sick as your secrets. But then again, it's this world. And what I keep trying to explain is that this blanket of security that the post-war consensus bequeathed on so many strivers, the younger generations are saying it's not happening for us. We believe that we've been on this really pleasant Valley Sunday plateau and it's coming to an end. And what's ironic is that it's that generation that rang the alarm on how many different things and, told all of their grandchildren, well, you'd better stay in the Blue Cathedral or the ocean levels are going to rise. By 2020, New York will be underwater. It isn't. Does that mean, well, what does that mean? And of course, now we have the scramble of epistemology that we're all dealing with. All right, back to this.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Who's the enemy in this post? Is it like boomers or like the devil or
well,
something else?
Let's ask that question once I finish the read.
Okay.
In a way, the boys at Normandy had a simpler task. The enemy was over there, and we were trying really hard to kill you. In your war, the enemy is everywhere and nowhere. He's between you and your wife, you and your parents, you and your kids, between your mind and your heart, especially between your heart and God. It's tough to face things like just getting a decent job, being able to own a home, being able to raise a family as war, but that's the way it is. No human authority is coming to save you. Nothing is fair. Every legacy institution is corrupt and incompetent. You have to muster a subtle quality of intense courage, find allies who are capable of being brothers in arms, and begin to figure out how to fight this fight. Then win it, fully accepting that death, or worse, is a perfectly plausible outcome. My advice from whatever wisdom I've acquired, focus locally. Flesh and blood is more trustworthy than virtual. The net is useful, but don't over-index. If you can build a community of 100 who are made of the right stuff, you'll have a real chance. Hyper-local. Get yourself sorted. Physically, psychologically, relationally. Your integrity is non-negotiable. A man without integrity is less than worthless. Connect with other functional communities and help each other. Sometimes it's operating doctrine, sometimes technology, sometimes it will require a physical presence. Why WNC, West North Carolina, assume that means folks know what I'm talking about here.
Western North Carolina.
Western North Carolina. Excuse me.
God bless you.
Cultivate discernment and gift your attention wisely, figuring out who is better at telling a more meaningful truth and not being dragged down rabbit holes is life and death. Again, a man without integrity is less than worthless. Go to church. If you don't have a church worth attending, find one or start one. You're going to need God. Here's the good news. These are the bad times. But if you become strong men, you will be the ones who create good times. And then, of course, there was the follow-up tweet and about from Loki. Maybe the real gods were the friends we made all along the way. If you don't have dream, you'll be baked into someone else's pie and you'll be consumed. 21st century problems require 21st century solutions, not 14th, not 18th, and not 4th. Jordan Hall responds, proposed. The frame of 21st century problems, solutions is a 20th century frame. The proper and only real response to the 21st century is eternal. Proposition granted. Eternal problems require eternal solutions. Do you have anything in addition you'd like? Okay, and I think again, part of what we've been focusing lately are some younger voices in the corner, and Gray is just on the cusp of a Gen Z and a millennial. He talked about that a little bit. So Gray went ahead and started a YouTube channel and invited Jordan on, and for all of his 86 subscribers, has almost 2,000 views. Way to go. And there's a follow-up one that I haven't watched yet, because before I watched the second one, I wanted to finish watching the first one. And there's a ton of good stuff in the first one. And even though I already made a video about this, I thought this connected well. So here we go.
So that sounds good. So what we'll do is we'll run through the first two, settle into the third.
First two go.
The kingdom. The third is more things that
we'd see what strikes a note with you.
So there's like maybe 4 things that I'm not quite clear where is the right one to kind of focus on, so we just lay them out. One is the question of what do we mean by the concept of war? What does that even mean? The second is, okay, what do we mean by spiritual?
Now, these two are obviously, because one of the things I wanted to get out in that live stream, but wasn't able to, was I really wanted... People are throwing that word, the war word, around a lot, in a lot of different ways. And it's really fudgy. And so I want to know, well, what do you mean by this? And of course, spiritual is always a deeply fudgy word.
The third is, what is the relationship between these ideas and discipleship? And the fourth would be something like the kingdom. What does it mean for us to be thinking about? Let me see what the right way of putting it. Well, I'll just put the kingdom out there as a way of putting it.
Yeah, pretty useful.
That's towards the fourth.
Yeah.
So the first is to say, skin in the game, maximum skin in the game. Well, there's 2 characteristics when you're engaging in war. One characteristic is it's for all the marbles, right? So it's extremely serious. It's I think maybe a thing.
Now, what he said there in terms of skin in the game and for all the marbles, I think is super helpful. Again, I've been summer reading, making my way through Ian Toll's History of the Pacific War. When I started it this summer, I was like, should I really spend my time reading this? There's other books I should be reading, but I'm often always reading books I should read, and I just really enjoy this. So I'm doing the audiobook, and so I'm just really enjoying it. But again, I am increasingly finding that the history of Japan in this period, I think, is very instructive for us. And lately I've been noticing the exorcism, how wars exorcise spirits from cultures vigorously. And so then Jordan reframing war here was super helpful.
To put forward, there's 2 characteristics when you're engaging in war. One characteristic is it's for all the marbles, right? So it's extremely serious. It's I think maybe a thing to put forward is that we've been raised in a really, really remarkably lazy and cowardly context. And we're by far the laziest and most cowardly human beings that have ever been developed. We face no duress. Even our crises would be considered a good day for almost anybody who's ever lived. And the point I want to bring forward is this, which is, but that's not how life works. Life is, in fact, actually for all the marbles, and not just particular moments in life. We tend to live life in a situation where we take the foot off the gas for most of the time, and then something important happens, and we try to focus, right? We try to kind of raise to the occasion. But the notion of war is that when you are at war, everything starts to line up. Everything becomes very strictly organized and a very straightforward telos. And part of it, of course, is the pressure of the adversary. If you do not have an...
And I think a big part, when he was talking about this, I thought, this is... Because again, this churchless Pleasant Valley post-war Sunday, people are living in the midst of it. It's like, this is great. This is wonderful. Everything's good. It's the end of history. Everything will keep going. When good times are here, we think they'll never end. They always do end.
Adversary who is very, very committed, fully committed to your complete defeat, then you're not at war. You may be there's a variety of different things that might be happening, but that's not what's happening. A hurricane is not real.
Yes.
And of course, the point is that this combination creates a tremendous degree of tautness. You get pulled very tight. You begin to notice that every single thing has to be taken as if it matters, because your margin of error gets smaller and smaller as your adversary becomes more and more capable of defeating you, and the consequences of defeat are more and more profound. And that's the thing, right? And so the end of war, like the last step, is ultimately either you are victorious or you are dead.
And again, the war with Japan in the Second World War, there's a lot to be learned from that war. I mean, all the focus is on the Nazis, and not near enough focus is on what happened in terms of Japan, why they started the war, what was happening in China, the mass suicide in Saipan, how that was reacted to. I want to make some more videos on this, but not this video.
I mean, the word dead here can extend to cover a large scope of things, right? The end of war, like the last step, is ultimately either you are victorious or you are dead. And I mean, the word dead here can extend to cover a large scope of things, right?
Your culture might be dead. Your religion might be dead. Your way of life might be dead. The things you value might be dead. And what's ironic about the kids will be all right, more or less, is they're facing a death of a world. A death of the world that their parents and grandparents fought for and slaved over and agonized for and suffered for, and it just sort of ends in a whimper.
The key thing is that you have been defeated, and you are now subject to the hierarchy and the value structures of some other will. That's the key idea. And so some part of you is dead, something.
And that happens in Japan. After they surrendered that regime, and there was the devotion to the emperor, that was an entire worldview, and it all collapses.
That you care about is dead. Otherwise, there would never been a war in the first place. You would have just changed your behavior. Okay, so that's what that frame ultimately grounds in. And
so I found that really helpful, because so often when I think of war, I think of the bombs and the planes and the killings and the explosions. I think of the materiality, and I don't think about what we're going to talk about, the spiritual aspect of it. And so whenever we hear spiritual warfare, I mean, these all sort of have these pictures for us that aren't terribly helpful.
I guess one thing I want to put up there is there's a lot of things that may be assumed to be imported by that frame, but most of them are, in fact, coming from a lack of awareness of how war works. So, for example, in the contemporary environment, if you're, what was that guy's name? Ciariglione, the Italian kid who shot the healthcare executive?
Yeah, I can't remember his Italian last name, but yes.
Yeah. You're not fighting war. Right? You may use a logic of we're at war and therefore this is justified, but the point is you're being very, very, and I want to use the kind of morality at the level of war, which is you're going to lose that war. That is a stupid way to fight war. It is a way to fight war stupidly, and stupid in the context of war is also immoral because it just means that you'll lose, and therefore everything you value has been sacrificed on the basis of your own stupidity. So what does it mean to fight war wisely? And I'll use wise even more. Wise includes within it something like effectively. So this is then when I started importing that notion of the 5th generation warfare frame, and then we'll blend over to spiritual war, because one of the things that happens is as we have moved forward in the art of war, we have more and more spiritualized the way that we go about waging war by necessity. So. And in fact, I wrote an essay about this. It was called The War on Sense Making. At the moment at the end of World War II, with the kind of mushroom clouds coming up in Japan, we had reached a point where kinetic war had been both maximized and had in some sense come to an end, meaning we had reached the edge of what could be done by virtue of just blowing the other guy up, because now we have mutually assured destruction, And if you try to blow the other guy up, he can blow you up, and nobody can win that war. Okay. So what that required, though, is kind of like a pressure cooker, meaning we're still going to be waging war. And this is important to keep in mind. There's no other way around it. Well, how do we do that? So we had to become more subtle. So the Cold War is this war of spies and propaganda. And what it does is it almost like, think about it as, this is the way it's always been, but it forces it to become more refined. It squeezes the front, the location where conflict occurs, into every possible location.
Mm-hmm.
The Chinese have, in fact, formalized this with what they call systems war, which is just to say what I just said. So the technique of systems war is you probe in what might even appear to be arbitrary locations. Let's try cyber war here. Let's try influencing filmmaking there. Let's try embedding backdoors in television and laundry machine chips, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And just watch and see where you're able to get more advantage. So think of this as a very fluid, modular thing that doesn't have any particular preconceived notion of where and how war is waged, but rather is able to deploy continuously. But ultimately, yes, recognizing that there's a sense of who is on each side.
Mm-hmm.
But as you accelerate through the fifth generation warfare, even that begins to break down. Because, of course, when you're engaging in maximum psyops, part of psyops is obfuscation of identity. And who exactly, plausible deniability, and even engaging in actions where the causation becomes diffuse. Have you heard of something, what is it called? I heard about it from Bruce Sterling a long time ago. I think it has a technical term now, but the notion would be something like, let's say I want somebody dead.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do is I produce a propaganda field that would have the statistical likelihood of provoking some random schizophrenic to decide that that's the guy he needs to take out to get his craziness to go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no connection, no causal linear connection between me and the actual event. And yet there is a connection between me and the actual event.
Yeah.
That's, but what you begin to see is you begin to see causation becomes diffuse, identity becomes diffuse. This is why I said
See, and this is where obviously there's no direct causation. Now suddenly all kinds of things open up. Now these guys recorded this before the Charlie Kirk assassination, but of course when you hear what they said there and you think about what's happening, you look at all the conversation around the Charlie Kirk stuff, it's like,
the centerpiece as you move through the arc of fifth generation warfare, it actually becomes isomorphic with what we would have called spiritual warfare in a very beautiful way, a very powerful and confusing way. Who are you? What are your values? Like if the end of the day, if to defeat you in war is to basically say, I now subordinate your values to my values.
And so suddenly you can see a spiritual war. Because it's what are your values? What do you hold? What do you believe? How does that then work out in your life? And obviously, it's immensely valuable in a spiritual war. I mean, Mark Parker's been, very frustrated with Christians because they're not behaving in a certain way that he wants and expects them to behave. And, obviously, fair enough, preachers do that all the time. But one way to sort of nullify the opposing army is to get them thinking they're doing fine, but actually not doing anything that is effective. Now, again, it's not just action for action's sake. It's things that are effective. I mean, because wisdom, when we pick up that whole wisdom thread of conversation, wisdom is about effectiveness towards a goal, towards an outcome, and meaning is about participation towards an outcome and a goal.
If I can get you to become confused about what your values are and to lose track of what you value or even what it means to value anything, then that's a perfectly great way to do it, and maybe actually much more effective than trying to blow you up. Because if I charge at you with a machine gun, I may harden your values, I may harden your commitment. And if I fail to really thoroughly kill you, in some time you'll come back and you may be subtle about it. Think Rome and Greece. Right? Rome ostensibly conquered Greece, but in many ways, Greece conquered Rome through the another door. So, and this is, I think, the point here is I think this is where we are. Right? So we're in this really interesting circumstance that and diagnostically, we are at war. And perhaps it's proper to say that we have always been at war. This is back to the Paul reference, and we'll connect back up to spiritual war.
Mm-hmm.
But the materiality of that war has become more and more palpable. And so, so now let's shift to Roman numeral 2, spiritual war. And I noticed that, for example, Pajot and Vervaeke have been having some, and Pajot, but in particular Pajot, have been having some really interesting ways of helping to make clear the meaning of some of these terms.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what is spirit? What is spiritual being? And what is angel?
Okay, so I'm going to, because not all of you will know what video they're talking about. If you look for this video on Transfigured, I'll put a link to it below. I think this was a good, this was a good sort of, this is a video that sort of advanced that conversation to as far as it would go. And I think also if you listen to both Jonathan and John's lectures that they gave at Midwestuary, both of those are on their channels respectively. Pretty soon, somebody asked on a live stream, where are the videos from Midwestuary? And the problem is they're all scattered throughout channels right now. Once the 30 days is up, I think Sam will just have them. I don't know if he's going to put them on Transfigured or if he's going to put them in its own YouTube channel, but they will be coming too. Where are we? Here we are.
Because
that conversation they just had recently was really, really good on that.
Really good, because what we have is an image of a spiritualized or supernaturalized or fantasized version of the ordinary reality that we tend to see.
Yeah.
So say, okay, an angel is like a mailman, but with wings and invisible. Oh, okay. That's not what we mean. But the problem is we don't have it. Like, that's how it.
And that's a really good illustration of. C.S. Lewis makes this point in his book Miracles. We have to think in terms that are in some ways sort of concrete to us. So a mailman with wings. Well, that has both like the messenger aspect, because in the word for angel in Greek is just messenger. But a messenger from heaven, so an angel with wings, but of course you say that, and you can read This Present Darkness, and people of course play with this. You can look at visual elements, but that's not what an angel is. And you can go, this has been a long-standing conversation, go all the way back to my second conversation with Jonathan Pajot on this.
Played it out, and we say, okay, demon is like a bully, like a physical bat, or like a really bad bear who is, smarter than a bear, but basically looks like that, but, dark and mostly invisible, comes out of the shadows, something like that. It's special effects. It's a very special effect heavy image.
Mm-hmm.
But the point, I believe, that they were making and Pajot has been making is that there's actually just one world. And in that world, these concepts are real and in many places very commonplace. As we talked about, like the gargoyle and the notion of the edge. I think his thing on Superman was very nice. Like this idea of, hey, what does it mean for somebody to be from the outside and to bring special capabilities to the inside? And is he a spy? Is he an agent? Mm-hmm. Or is he, in fact, a hero? Somebody who is serving the inside but bringing special knowledge from the outside. That's a very clean way of describing a particular archetype that is spiritual, right? So now we're beginning to kind of hammer on the notion of reconnecting to Paul. All right, so now let's reconnect to Paul and also kind of ring the bells on this notion of fifth generation warfare vis-a-vis Gen Z. Sorry, are you Gen Z? Yeah, I guess you're the oldest,
I am,
the youngest possible millennial.
I'm the youngest possible millennial, or you could say oldest possible Gen Z. I'm the youngest of 3 brothers, and so I would say I'm more millennial than Gen Z, only by the nature of being the youngest in my family. I think if I was the oldest, I would classify myself as Gen Z.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way of doing it. So when we move to sort of between Roman numeral 2 and Roman numeral 3, so I'm going to bring discipleship into it as well. The commitment, the requirement, and the actual diagnosis is that we are fully immersed and have always been and shall always be fully immersed in a spiritual war, which is to say, very simply, everything matters. Mm-hmm. Every choice you make, every action action you take, every breath, every word is ultimately laden with consequence. It's either
and that's a point that C.S. Lewis makes in Mere Christianity. But again, this is something that if you go to church, people will tell you. In a secular world, if you don't go to church, you're not going to get that message, because there's an I should make a clip of what Vervaeke said. I mean, there's this implicit atheism, and there's this implicit materialism that basically says, if I've got good health, if the house is in order, and if the children seem to be doing well, I mean, that's the goal, that I have a pleasant trip from birth to death, thinking nice thoughts, having good experiences. And so life is this little strangely bracketed experience that starts and stops, but in the end, meaning crisis, in the end, it means nothing.
Towards God or away from God. There is no neutral and there is no relevant. Well, that's a wartime footing, right? That's that mentality of full skin of the game, full stake. And by the way, profoundly pitted adversary who is committed to kicking you in the wrong direction, and is waging fifth generation warfare, which is to say waging warfare through any means available. Okay. And so we say, oh, well, the actual ordinary proper footing of a Christian in discipleship is war. And I should say, just to harken back, and not stupid war. Let us not endeavor to wage the war against powers and principalities stupidly. And a very simple example of that would be to try to wage that war on our own behalf, or even just using our own purposes, our own power, our own capabilities, because we'll lose that war, because the adversary we're facing is infinitely more capable than we are at every one of those characteristics. And we've been given one very specific needle to I have the needle to thread, which is to be on the cross. And then there's a very specific way to participate in the war that is being waged. Now I can actually shift it. The war that is ongoing. It may in fact just be the nature of the world into which we are thrown. And so it gets very narrow. It gets very tight. Now what I'll do is I want to flip back to the first and then flip over to the fourth and kind of juxtapose them, because this is the big point. It's and I said this sort of thing a while back, even before becoming a Christian, which was, for a very long time, thousands of years, there has been a conversation about the end of the world, and also a conversation about the necessity of repent and to sin no more. But now the material conditions are catching up with the spiritual proposition, meaning there is very little choice left but to fully commit yourself to discipleship. And I would say, in fact, there is no choice left, but there's a few years where you can pretend otherwise. You will be consumed, body, mind, and soul, by AI if you are not able to cleave utterly to Christ. For example, how do you go about bringing together a group of people who are able to hold together with fellowship in the context of
now before there's a raft of questions about, I don't believe AI. He used AI for example. The point is, the day of the Lord comes, and the day of the Lord is fractal, and it scales. The day of the Lord will come to you. It could come in a divorce. It could come in a heart attack. It could come in a firing. It could come in a betrayal. It could come in all of these things. You might have a lovely period of Pleasant Valley Sunday, and then it ends. And again, one of the things that Rod Dreher kept saying at Midwestuary, just even in a lot of his the things that he wrote after Midwestuary, it was clear to him that the people who gathered there did not trust in the institutions. What do you mean? Trust in them for what? Because you always trust for something. You always trust toward something. And basically the trust is, I don't believe they will actually deliver on the implicit promises that we have as a civilization and a nation, which is that things will keep getting better, that I will live in a better way than my parents. And the reason I don't believe that is because by the time My parents were my age. They were married. They had a certain number of children. They had a certain degree of job security. They owned a home. They're at a certain level, and I'm already behind. And so I believe we are in decline. And, again, the truth is, the idea that, I find this so often pastorally, the normal that people imagine, it ain't normal. It's sort of like, it's analogous to these women that are in their mid-30s, and you ask them, what kind of a man do you want? Well, I want over 6 feet tall, income of over 6 figures, and like there's like 3 sixes or something. I don't remember what the third 6 is. But, and I'd ask these women, well, how much money do you expect them to make? Oh, and they give me like they should be making at least $250,000, $300,000 a year, and it's like, do you want them divorced or not divorced? How many kids do you want them to have? Because very quickly you discover that this is not normal. These men aren't just hanging around in bars waiting for some woman in her mid-30s to pick them up and marry them. The imagination that we have about normal is deeply skewed, because I could go to the Slate Star Codex, how bad is it list that I've done in various videos now for a while. Is it in that blog? Anyway.
The turbulence and the tribulation that is simply already upon us and is going to increase over time under every possible scenario. Well, there's only
that's the question.
That's the question, and the answer's in the book. Right? This is the thing. We could have gotten away with, and particularly in the context of this burst of neo-Nephilim, called the technological revolution, the industrial revolution, right? And the burst of wealth and the burst of material capacity and the burst of sorcery, like power, our ability to express our will in the world that happened from 1500 until yesterday. We were able to be inveigled to believe that under our own power, we could achieve the values that we value, and could, in fact, discern and maintain those values. Mm-hmm. And it turns out all three of those are false. Yeah. In reverse order. We actually have lost track.
And that's exactly what younger generations are seeing. They're saying, I don't believe, first of all, even if you can deliver the materiality to me, I've seen that the materiality isn't itself life-sustaining. People go on to more meaningful things. You can be wealthy and have one heck of a meaning crisis. There's no there. And they see at every level that the world is, as C.S. Lewis notes, we live in the age of decay, and even if you live in a very good place, in a very good time, the party is going to come to an end, and chances are good it's going to end badly.
Of what values are. We've lost track of the ability to even distinguish between right values and wrong values for the most part in our culture. And as the wheels come off the bus and as the structures of technology, and I would say like General Motors is a structure of technology, right? There's a variety of different variations in the word technate, but you can see within that entire portfolio, as the wheels begin to come off of all of those different variations, we realize, which by the way, again, has always been the case in every individual life and throughout the whole of history, that we are utterly exposed to the working of the adversary. And so this is in some sense very beautiful. But the circumstance you find yourself in forces you to realize what Paul has been articulating. It forces you to say, whoa, yeah, I guess that's true. There is only one possible place. Mm-hmm. There's only one safety. There's only one peace, and there's only one way. And it's funny. And this is not like, I'm not saying that doctrinally. I'm saying it practically. It's like trying to think. Very, very much the metaphor of you're walking up a mountain path, or was it Karhadras in Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
And they think, well, no, we'll go up the mountain, but you can't. The path is the way is shut, so we have to go through Moria. There is only one way. Not because we imagined it as such, not because somebody told us that, not because it's fancy, but rather that's just practically how it is. There is only one way. And so I guess the major point is to say, look, everybody, take a look at it. view what's happening from this lens. It's a lens that's both ancient, and you can see it on Paul's lips, and it's a lens that is incredibly prescient of what is coming. And recognize that the things that we had been conveyed, things that we had been torpified to believe were simply ordinary, like having a home to raise your kids in, frankly, being able to feed your family, are not and kind of have never been. But we were able to have this moment, 2-generation moment, the boomer moment, which they were born into that and have lived through it, and will probably die just at the tail end of it. So from their point of view, it was always reality. But that was an incredible bubble. And and unfortunately, we lost track of the reality of it. We lost track of the stake and the responsibility and the degree to which we have drifted from anything vaguely like truly being able to be people who are worthy of having that responsibility. And okay, so let me just see if I can finish. Okay, so maybe the kingdom. So then what happens is it's a recall or a remembering. I've been really playing with this word. Amniensis. And how do you say it? It's the Greek word for remembering.
Okay.
I need to maybe like just repeat it over and over again because it's a little bit tricky for my lips. It's Christ, like remember me.
Yes.
And do this in remembrance of me. But also to play with, to bring together, to remember again.
Remember,
Yeah. So the call is for us to remember who we have been and who we are fundamentally. And to recognize that it has always been the case that we must become capable of being warriors in the body of Christ, and that the directive of what that kind of war means are the kinds of things that Paul spoke about. You're in the middle. You've got a 4-month-old child. The simple act, the simplest possible act of raising a child, conceiving a child, gestating a child, giving birth to a child, raising a child, is perfectly infinitely laden with difficulty. It's the simplest possible act and the most difficult possible act simultaneously, because it's the most meaningful act. Okay, well then that's warfare. Like, that's full skin in the game. That's full stake. Like, every choice you make will actually have, and you're utterly overwhelmed. And in this case, your adversary is twofold, or I guess threefold. One is your sinful nature, your own weakness, and the way that you will get in your own way. The second is the adversary, right? Constantly trying to separate you from what is right. And then the third is the complexity of the reality that you find yourself in, the fact that you're in a fallen world. And by fallen world, what I mean is a world where difficulty is just part of reality, really profound, utter difficulty. So it's funny, this tweet, in some sense, speaks towards hey, the circumstances you find yourself in are highly novel. The boomers can't save you because your world is not the world that they even are capable of truly imagining exists at all. And therefore, you need to brush that off, step into it with an acceptance of the fact that this is a full stake, full skin in the game, no whining, it's victory or death kind of an attitude. And recognize that is a highly spiritual, in sort of the weak sense of spiritual, meaning I need to take care of my own emotional regulation. I need to take care of my relationships with of the things that don't seem like the kind of stuff that happens during wartime, but is exactly the kind of stuff that happens during wartime when it's real. Yet at the same time, the tweet is also saying, and this is actually coming from the point of view of eternity. This is just the actual core structure of reality as it always has been. And we are remembering that reality. And so you are called to wake up from a long dream and in some sense, therefore, recognize that, and this is just, we're far enough apart, oddly enough, in age that there's almost nothing in common, yet our children are 1 month apart in age. Yeah. So in that, we're very, very kin. My great-grandparents my grandfather actually was raised in a house that had no electricity and no running water. It was 2 generations away. He was raised in a house, no electricity, no running water, outhouse, the whole bit. And my dad would go and visit and spend time there in Crockett, Texas. Which is to say, the context in which they were raised was really rather harsh in comparison to now. Like if you or I both found ourselves in a circumstance where we were trying to provide for our families, where we had an outhouse.
And that was true of the homes my father grew up in. My father on the Great Plains of America. I'd hear stories about my grandmother, and they didn't talk about it like it was a huge deal or deprivation. They had an outhouse, and they'd had funny stories about once a pig got out and someone was visiting them, and they came out of the outhouse, and in the night they saw these two eyes, and oh, it was a pig from a nearby farm. Pigs can get huge, and my father had all kinds of stories about growing up, and I've got all kinds of stories about those houses out in the plains in the Depression. And it wasn't in Texas. Well, I guess it can get cold in Texas too, but it was in places like Minnesota where it can get really cold. I remember my father telling me the story about when he came down as a child. Grandma, of course, had to do all the wash by hand, and she hung it up in the kitchen to dry because the kitchen is where the stove was. Now the stove would tend to put soot out into the air, which would get on the clothes. But he remembers going down one morning, and in the kitchen where the stove was, the clothing was, frozen like boards there. And so you've got this cheap house in the middle of the plains in Minnesota that has no insulation, there's no central heat, there's an outhouse out back. That was just life. And my grandparents lived through the Depression basically by growing a lot of vegetables in the vegetable garden. That was normal life. Now, well, part of the, when I lived in the Dominican Republic, the electricity went out, the water went out. I mean, we had all of these things that would sort of intrude, but we also had all of these systems to account for it. And so obviously, if the sewer stopped working in a modern American city, there's going to be a crisis because you don't have an outhouse. And if the water stops working, you're going to have a crisis because you don't have a hand pump in the kitchen. And so, fair enough.
And we had no electricity, we had no running water, we would really feel like something truly bad had happened.
Yeah.
Right? Like, wow. And probably
especially in Texas. I'm like,
yeah, especially in Texas, for crying out loud. Like Crockett's not far from you. You know exactly what this feels like. We'd probably say this is actually unendurable. This is not a real thing.
Yeah, like yet, you have to move.
Yeah, this is and and who knows what, right? Living in a car is better than that. And anyways, it actually kind of is probably.
And of course, the people I lived with and ministered to in the third world. I mean, one of the things that we often did was help them build latrines because otherwise they just went in the field, which in some ways is a little nicer, but the problem is that, well, there's lots of problems with that. So on and on and on and on. Well, I haven't finished this thought.
But the point is they totally survive, meaning it's within us. We have that capability. And that the material conditions we find ourselves in have never really been the point. The primary point is the spiritual power, the spiritual power that we tap into. Can we actually rest in the peace that is beyond understanding? If we can, then if martyrs can be eaten by lions with beatific visions, we can probably get past the tribulations that we're facing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't want to make it trivial at all. Right? The point is, in fact, you guys in particular, are facing a material reality that is ultimately a spiritual crisis, because we've been sold for 500 years trading the spiritual reality for material abundance. Mm-hmm. That was the trade that was made after the 30 years war and the emergence of liberalism. That trade is breaking down, and we're finding that we have neither. And to respond is not going to be, let us continue to endeavor to pump up on the material side, but rather, can we migrate to the spiritual?
And if you're playing the game of the church of the left and the church of the right, both are pretty much playing that game. Oh no, it's and don't get me wrong, affluence solves a lot of problems because poverty causes a lot of problems. But affluence doesn't solve other problems.
We actually rebuild from that location, because that's the center. That's the place from which abundance flows. That's the place from which living water flows. And then this is the place from which community comes. Right? I think I've said this before. It goes like this. It's like society over here. Society is actually necrotic. Society is the undead. It's the zombie, right? It's an actual dead thing, like the bug guy from Men in Black, skin suit, right?
Yeah.
There's community, but community is what you call it when society is what's looking at it. The real thing is communion.
Yes.
Communion is real. When you're in communion, you will naturally also have community.
Of course.
If you're out of communion, community is the feedstock of society.
For society, yeah.
Yeah. And so restoration of communion.
Yep.
And all that entails. So, I mean, in my simplest tweet, and I think I actually said this at some point. Maybe I said it recently. It says, like, what do I do? What do I do? I was like, at the end of the day, go to church. Like, it actually is really a call to do that. But the point is, we probably don't even really know what that means anymore.
Yeah, I think you could double click on that, because I think that's where the rub lies of what does church mean, you know? Like, when I first became a believer, I think, man, I had...
Well, the link to the video is below. You can keep watching. I'll keep watching. Now, downstream from the Charlie Cook assassination, as this Quillette piece, I'll put the link below. I don't know how Quillette feels about me using their stuff, so I'm just gonna lead it. But they go into this conversation about brain rot, and again, so here's seemingly a well put together church family. I don't know what kind of church they went to. The father was an honorable man, probably wanted to save the life of his son. But basically, if you look at the story that Tyler Robinson, you have this guy talking about him. Basically, the internet got him. The internet got him. And it was the internet that mom and dad paid for, with the toys that mom and dad paid for. And the church that he went to didn't save him. And so now we're going to hear, I mean, the language is going to continue. Oh, brain rot. I think that's a kind of a dumb way of saying it, because it's not really brain rot. It's so when we hear all of this talk about AI and demons, again, I think the images that people have are something analogous to mailmen with wings, frankly. And I think it's much more... This is why I really appreciated Christian Baxter's conversation with the three Gen Zers, because the truth is, as Jordan Hall said, these guys grew up in a very different world than I did. And my kids grew up in a different world, even though we were all in the same house, even though we homeschooled. Again, I tell the story of a colleague of mine who, I didn't even homeschool our kids K through 12, but this guy and his wife homeschooled his kids K through 12. They live in a fairly undeveloped part of the country. I don't want to give too many details, but his daughter, he came out once for a church thing that we both had to do together, and he said, I'm going to try to see my daughter. I don't know if she'll open the door. And in her case, it might not have even been the internet. It might have been, I mean, this is, Satan is a lion, roaming lion, looking who he can consume. We're going to call it brain rot. I thought it was a good essay, but I think it's underdeveloped, because I think without a spiritual register, again, we're trying to use the medical register, and you could see sort of okay, now we're going to use mental health language. Well, this person is crazy. Or now brain rot is going to become a medical term. Brain rot could, I suppose, be a physiological term if actually the brain itself is rotting, but I don't think Tyler Robinson's brain is rotting at all. I think it is completely encased in skin, and something else has gotten in it. Maybe you could say mind rot. But again, just look at the way that we're reacting, and you very quickly have the sense, of course younger generations don't believe that institutions can take care of them. Just look at how the institutions are failing, even in trying to come up with the nomenclature of what, when I was listening to Joseph talk about what's out there, and it's like most of the people my age don't know what's out there, because the truth is we're spending all of our time working and doing productive things in our lives with real human beings, maybe a little bit of contact with the internet, and most of those people are going all the way in. And like I said in my talk, or like I said in one of the question and answer periods at the Midwestuary, increasingly we're very much going to see children that grew up with phones and iPads in their hands versus children that didn't. And very quickly, homeschoolers aren't just going to be able to win spelling bees. Homeschoolers are going to be able to have relationships and friendships and lives, and other people are going to be so incredibly dysfunctional. But human beings are astoundingly resilient, and people wander into AA meetings and they wander into churches, and their lives get rebuilt. Part of what's happening is that this Pleasant Valley post-war Sunday crowd has no category for this. Popped up in my feed.
Here. It is September 8th, 2025, and today I wanted to give an overview of how it feels to be a convert into the Eastern Orthodox Church after about 4 years, 4.5 years or so. It is a very different experience than it was in 2020, 2021 when I was converting. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. The most important thing, this is if anyone is thinking of converting, if they're wanting to know what it feels like being a convert, it is certainly like entering into a new world. And indeed, you are entering into a new world. Your entire identity is blown up when you realize that Eastern Orthodoxy is the way to go, and your entire worldview has been incorrect, and you have to drop every assumption that you've ever known, and then have to reassemble your own mind and your own heart in the phronema of the church. It is a shattering experience to come into the church, and it's also the best experience you'll ever have, because you're coming into truth, you're coming into the hands of structure of the gate, right? So of some peace and security and knowledge, truth, wisdom. So it's a wonderful thing. That being said, at the beginning, once you convert right away, it's really a shattering experience. You get a new saint's name. People start calling you your saint's name. You wonder if you're doing this whole, like, what do you call it? Like, imposter syndrome. You think you're like pretending like you're Eastern Orthodox, but somehow you feel like you're really not. Everyone, when you first convert, everyone seems to be dressing a certain way, behaving a certain way. They all seem to know certain things. They have virtues that you don't have. They're nicer. They have a way that they talk about themselves. Like, they have a language that they use amongst themselves and vocabulary that you're not used to. And so it's very difficult to convert. Certainly, my experience was as a single woman. It was very difficult. So after 4 years, what I've started, I just kind of wanted.
So if you're interested in that, you can watch it. And some people say, well, Christian Reformed minister, why are you dumping on your own tradition? And hey, I'm going to be, I talk about these issues. Okay, here's some woman who went Protestant and then Catholic.
16, where I was going through a lot personally and politically. I was so lost as to what to believe. I had tons of family who had gone, left or were starting to go radical left, and that was, the cool thing, the social justice thing. That's what you did if you, if you were a nice person, or if you were, if you weren't racist, right? If you believed that women had worth, you went radical left. And people I loved and looked up to and wanted the respect of were all going left. when Trump started running. And I was in the gaming culture, the gaming community. And we know that that is a godless, horrible, dark, miserable place to be, but that's where I was. I was this close to starting to get sleeve tattoos, lots of piercings, and while I wasn't acting promiscuous, I know that had I stayed on that path, that's where I was going to head. It's just this godless place searching for man's approval. And then I started getting videos suggested to me by friends on Twitter, gaming friends, who were like, look at this idiot, look at this misogynistic white male jerk. And I would watch it and go like, oh yeah, look at him and the token black woman with him, right? Candace Owens. But their arguments and the way they were debating was really interesting. I couldn't believe that their whole shtick was having discussion with people who disagreed with them. I thought that's so interesting. You don't see that on Fox or CNN. I had never seen that before. And you realize that he's so confident. She, Candace Owens too, the two of them were so confident in truth and what they were standing for. And they spoke it so plainly. You know, it didn't feel theatrical. It didn't even feel mocking until people started being really disrespectful to them. They felt warm and down to earth and balanced, reasonable, intelligent people. And Candace Owens was beautiful, and Charlie Kirk in my 19-year-old brain was kind of cute. I was like, this is interesting. I've never seen something like this, where these people seem happy and they're engaging with dissenters constantly. That's their whole thing. And so I stuck around. I kept watching. And people would ask questions and I would think, oh, I've heard that before. Yeah, what's he going to say? And he'd respond in a calm, logical, fact-based manner. And even though I tend to be a very emotional person, I also care a lot about, deeply care about truth. And he was just so confident in talking about what is truth. And it was always based in Christianity and logic. And I stuck around for him, and that led me to Matt Walsh, right? And who still had such a huge influence on me, including, you know, wanting to go into the Catholic Church. And then I am a consistent fan of Candace Owens and then Daily Wire and Ben Shapiro. And these people took me from the path of radical leftism.
Okay, so is she being radicalized by the other side? I mean, have the argument, that's fine. My point is that the Pleasant Valley Sunday, the kids are okay, I guess, that is just coming to an end. And people are going to find and look for a really religious home, because they have a sense that the plain vanilla is just not going to cut it against the brain rot or the slop or all of these things that are coming our way. And, you know, if I think to a degree, if we thought that the generation gap, for those of us who can remember back when that, I don't know when that term was coined, back when that term was coined in the 60s and 70s, that's when I think it was coined. We're just going to have multiple generational steps, and it is increasingly going to be, well, is whatever you're practicing so destabilizing the rest of your life that you can't reproduce? I mean, this is the point of Jordan's tweet. You can't reproduce. You can't maintain a friendship. This nice Pleasant Valley post-war plateau is coming to an end. And buckle up, Buttercup. I think that's right. But the answer isn't necessarily some dramatic thing. I continue to be a Calvinist. I continue to have faith in Christ. I continue to believe that that by his grace, he will see us through, even if tragedies strike. Yeah, I get that. What I want to push back from are simple little steps. Okay, she took these steps, so follow her steps. Well, maybe not. I don't know. Personally, I still got this Daily Wire account from back when Jordan was doing stuff, and I was the same day I was going to cancel it, and it had automatically redone. I was like, oh, for another year. I haven't looked at it since. So again, my point isn't the political aspect. My point is, we better think about, what does it mean to go to church? What does it mean to have a community? What does it mean to trust in Christ? What does it mean? And this world coming to an end. That's what it looks like to me. And yeah, I think that's something of what this means. So yeah, I like this video better than the one that I have in the membership section. So leave a comment.